Hello students, welcome to my lectures on mechanical unit operations. Today we are going to discuss about the most confusing topic to my students, which are dealt with the pressures. How to read a pressure from the pressure dial. Okay, the main confusion arises from converting to absolute pressures, gauge pressures and vacuum pressures. Today from this lecture you will have clarified that particular doubt. Before I show how exactly the pressure dial looks like, I am going to give you a small basic. Then how to read gauge pressures, vacuum pressures, absolute pressures, and how to convert from one pressure to another pressures. Okay, let us go to the board. The one which is on my left hand side, I have given some scale here. Any pressure starts from the 0, okay? It could be 0 atmospheres or 0 lb force per inch square or 0 psi. Everything starts with the baseline of 0, and we are comparing from that of 0 to higher pressures, then it is called the absolute pressure. Even though in many of the calculations in the chemical engineering, you have to put in the value of this absolute pressure. Don't try to use gauge pressure values. Always convert everything to the absolute pressures and use that value in designing the pumps or in the filtrations or anywhere wherever the pressure thing comes in play. So this is the baseline from where you have to start measuring the pressure. The minimum to minimum pressure you will find is 0. Okay, wherever you go, the minimum pressure you can achieve is 0 atmospheres. Because let us consider if you are staying here at a 1 atmospheric pressure, then what is the absolute pressure right now? 1 atmosphere. And at the same condition, what is the gauge pressure? It is 0 gauge pressure is equal to 1 atmospheric pressures. So let us start with basic 0 atmosphere. That means this is a minimum value that can exist it. So beyond this 0, if you try to increase the scale, the pressure will rise. You can see 0 atmosphere, 0.25 atmosphere. I am talking about the absolute. Wherever you start with the 0, then always you say that whatever the pressures you are measuring is called absolute pressures, which goes into the calculations. 0, higher 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, 1 up to 1.75. I have given some scale, right? Whatever there is on the absolute pressures on that which is marked with black marker. Okay, the baseline starts with 0. The one which is on the left, okay, which is in the blue color, it's called the gauge pressures. Gauge pressures always, you can see the gauge pressure, okay, at 1 atmosphere, that means at the present condition I am staying at a 1 atmosphere. Then you tell me how much amount of gauge is there. When you start measuring from 1 atmosphere absolute, the gauge will be 0. That means at 1 atmosphere, right now where I am staying, we are all staying on the earth at 1 atmospheric pressure. At that particular time, what will be gauge pressure? The gauge pressure is 0. That means the baseline for the gauge pressure is at 1 atmospheric absolute. That means 1 atmospheric absolute means that is a 0 gauge pressure. Above the 0 gauge pressure is called positive pressures. Below this gauge pressure is called a negative pressures. But in absolute pressure there is no negative value. Only in absolute starts with a 0 and ever increasing. Gauge pressure, it is at 0 at 1 atmosphere. If you go for the positive pressures, higher pressures, it will be a positive value, and negative pressures, it is called the negative gauge pressures. That means if you see minus 0.5 atmosphere, that means you are in the vacuum system now, not in the high pressure systems. That is why when you compare for 0, come back to the baseline, the gauge pressure values are negative. When you go to the above, the gauge pressure values are positive. But in terms of absolute, the start with 0 and it is ever increasing. Okay, based on this, what is my total value? That is, today I have taken you point number 1, what is the gauge pressure, and point number 2, what is the gauge pressure. That means if I know the absolute pressure, how to calculate the gauge pressure. So let us do example at 2 different points. Number 1 is called What if my absolute pressure is 1.75, what is my gauge pressure at that point? At point number 2, if my absolute pressure is 0.5 atmosphere, what will be my gauge pressure? Okay, this is the simple formula. Always the absolute pressure is 1 atmosphere. The example, point number 1, you wanted to measure the gauge pressure at the point number 1. How it goes? This is absolute pressure. The absolute pressure starts with a 0, but here in the meanwhile the gauge pressure comes. Okay, total pressure is 1 atmosphere. यहाँ से यहाँ तक 1 atmosphere is absolute, plus यहाँ from here to here what is the gauge pressure. That means the in fluid mechanics or everywhere you get to see this equation. The absolute equal to 1 atmosphere via from here to here plus gauge from here to here. That is P absolute is equal to P atmospheric plus P gauge. What is the, from this equation, what is my P gauge? Is equal to P absolute minus P atmosphere. This is the general equation people use. At point number 1, I know P absolute pressure is 1.75. Okay, P absolute is 1.75. That means if I put here the value of what is the absolute pressure is 1.75 atmospheres, because I am taking the unit of atmosphere, minus what is the P atmosphere? Always 1 atmosphere minus 1, which is equal to 0.75 atmosphere gauge. That means at 1.75 absolute atmospheric pressure, then at that x equal to 1.75 minus 1.75. Okay. Similarly, at point number 2, here your vacuum pressure comes in play. Use the same equation. You know, here the absolute pressure at this point 2 is called 0.5 atmospheric absolute. At this 0.5 atmospheric absolute, what is your gauge pressure? Like this. Same. Y atmosphere, that means at this point, at y point, I know 0.5 is my absolute atmospheric pressure, minus what is atmospheric pressure? Always 1. Okay. 0.5 minus 1 is equal to minus 0.5 atmosphere. That means the y here is minus 0.5. Okay, that means negative gauge pressures are indicating the system is in vacuum state. Okay, the positive pressures are indicating the system is in gauge pressure positive, that means system is in higher pressure. Gauge negative means the system which you consider is in a vacuum pressure. This is how the scale, but keep always in mind, always better you do the calculations once you convert everything to the absolute pressures, because in industries also the dial starts with 0. Any pressure dial starts with 0. Anything starts with 0 means at present condition I am staying in 1 atmosphere, that means 0. That means if any indicator is showing 0 there, that means it is gauge. Okay, because right now in 1 atmosphere, if gauge is showing 0, that doesn't mean that there is no pressure, that means the gauge pressure is 0 there, which is 1 atmosphere. So let us go, I will show you some dials, vacuum dial as well as high pressure, that means negative and positive dials, how it looks like, how to read the things I will show you today. Okay, let us go. Dear students, let us see the negative gauge pressures looks like. In our lab we have the vacuum oven connected to the vacuum pump. Let us see how the vacuum pressure gauges looks like. If you see on the top of the vacuum pump, there is a gauge that is that has been fitted, and observe there are scales that are given. Okay, and you can see, you can take, because there are two scales, one is on the black and one is on the red. Like if you see this curve, you will see the two indicators as a kind of one. The black one is in mm per Hg reading, and the red one is in inches Hg. Okay, the black one is in the mm Hg and the red one is the inches Hg. See where it starts with. It has started with 0. If you take the mm Hg, it has started with the 0, and the dial went to till minus 760. That is what the minimum pressure you can go with the gauge, right? Minus 0 atmosphere means, that means minus 760 mm Hg. It starts with 0. As you increase the vacuum in this vacuum oven, the pressure dial will start to reduce, and the maximum it can go to the minus 760 mmHg atmosphere. See, these are the negative dials, okay. Please keep in mind, this is the minus 760. That means the one which is starting from 0 ending with minus 760 means it is showing the gauge pressures which is less than 0 systems. That means when you see the minus 200 here, that means minus 200 means is less than 1 less than 1 atmosphere. That means the system is in the vacuum. This is how the vacuum dial looks like. Okay, let us go to the high pressure systems now. And now let us see the pressure gauges that is connected to the cylinder. Cylinders are always at high pressure, right? The one which is connected to the cylinder is called the pressure regulator. We have the gauges here, 2 gauges, and don't worry about the another gauge. And let us observe this particular gauge systems. And if you observe here, and if you observe, now it starts with 0 here, 0 here, and it goes around and it goes to maximum. Here also we have the two readings. One, the black one is in kg per centimeter square, and the red one is in psi. And if you observe the red one, and which is in psi, the minimum is 0, the maximum it goes to around 300 psi. That means this indicator, this is in positive indicator. That means if it starts with 0, that means it is a gauge pressure. Okay, if you try to increase the pressure in the system, the dial goes from 0 to maximum to 300 psi. That means if it is showing a positive, means that this is the positive gauge pressures. That means above atmospheres. Okay, students, you have seen how the vacuum gauges and the positive pressure gauge look like, how the negative pressure gauge look like. Let us see a small calculation. Example, initially I have shown you how the vacuum gauges looks like. It starts with the 0 and ends with the minus 60. Okay, 0 means if it has started with 0 means that is a gauge pressure. That means at normal temperatures and pressure, if your pressure gauge is showing the 0, that means it is showing the gauge pressures, because gauge always starts at 0 at 1 atmosphere, and this is 0. And right now the dial, if example I have created some vacuum, the dial is showing minus 300. What is the unit of this minus 300 is mmHg. If the dial is showing minus 300 mmHg, that means minus 300 mmHg gauge pressure. Then I have to convert into the gauge pressure to the absolute pressures. P gauge is equal to minus 300. From the equation, P absolute is equal to P atmospheric plus P gauge. What is the hamesha? What is the always the atmospheric pressure in terms of mmHg is equal to 760 mmHg. That is, P atmosphere is equal to 760 mmHg minus reading of gauge pressure reading is minus 300, 760 minus 300, which is 460 mmHg vacuum. This is an absolute pressure. That means the system is less than 760 mm absolute, means it is under vacuum now. Similarly, if I go to the positive pressure gauges, as I told you, the thing that is connected to the cylinders, that will be in the positive readings. I told you it starts with 0. As you can see, what I have shown you in our lab is in psi, pound lb force per square inch. Example, if that particular positive pressure is showing the value of 150 psi, now means that 150 psi is nothing but 150 psi gauge pressure. Now I have to convert to the gauge pressure to the absolute pressure. I have used same equation. P absolute is equal to P atmospheric plus P gauge. Okay, then what is the P absolute? 14.7 plus 150. यहाँ है थोड़ा सा इसमें कोई. Okay, then P absolute is equal to 14.7 plus 150 psi. What is the atmospheric pressure at in terms of lb force per inch square at 1 atmosphere is nothing but 14.7 psi. 14.7 plus this reading is 150 is a positive reading, plus 14.7 plus 150 is equal to 164.7 lb4. That means total absolute pressure in this case is a 164.7 lb force per inch square. If you convert lb force per inch square to atmospheric pressure, you will get a value of 11.2 atmospheres. That means you are in the positive direction, because more than 1 atmosphere, that means in the positive pressures. And thank you.